You're listening to the Veterinary Cannabis Society podcast. In this episode, we sit down with veterinarian Dr. Sheila Dodson and Evermore Pet Food co-founder Hanna Mandelbaum to discuss pet nutrition. The speakers dive deep into why it matters, how to identify great products, and misconceptions. They even talk about controversial happenings in the veterinary food manufacturing world. You'll walk away with a better ability to discern what your pet needs and an understanding of how to talk to your veterinarian about nutrition. So Hanna and Sheila, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just going to jump straight into it. The audience will already know quite a bit about your background based on our previous podcasts together. But just to make sure everyone's on the same page, I'll start with you, Hanna. Can you give me a brief overview of how you came to the pet nutrition industry?
I will give you the extremely short version. I was in a situation where I had to step in to help someone who had what I call an underground pet food company, and she was very ill. And while I was helping her run this company during her illness, she actually passed away. And my now business partner and I ended up taking what was sort of a seedling and growing it into what it is today. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we had to become extremely quick studies. So that's my 5,000-foot view background.
Excellent. And Dr. Sheila, what about you?
So I was probably pushed into it kicking and screaming because nutrition was never my passion, but I learned the traditional nutrition through vet school. But when I came to practice at my current practice, it was an integrated practice, and the previous owner was very much into nutrition. And so coming into this practice, and she left kind of unexpectedly after I'd only been here a few months. And so the patients and the owners kind of demanded that I pick up where she left off. So I was kind of forced into it. And then it became quite the passion because I really learned a lot in those first couple of years. And I'm extremely now passionate about this topic that I never would have thought I would have loved.
That's actually a good question. Both Hanna and Sheila, how long have you both been, I'll say, practicing pet nutrition? Sheila or Hanna first, go ahead.
16 years at this point.
So for me, I would say about 15 years. I joined this practice in 2010. So yeah, 15 years for me. So very close to Hanna.
It sounds like in some ways we're really similar. We both kind of got thrown into the pool and had to learn how to swim.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that makes it really fascinating because we didn't know this was our passion until we were actually faced with a dilemma of how do I get through this crisis situation. And so out of it has become really rewarding for me, I know personally.
Wow. Like I said, I brought you two here together for a reason today, and the reasons are already showing themselves even more. So I want to just think quickly, stay on this topic for a little bit longer. 16 years, 15 years, starting with you, Hanna, how much has the pet nutrition world changed in that time?
Oh my gosh. The biggest thing I think is the rise of fresh foods. When we started, and gently cooked foods as well. When we started, the category of a gently cooked fresh food didn't exist. Raw had already been niche but established. But the idea of a gently cooked food was not something that was known about or accepted. And in that past 16 years, suddenly the category is exploding. Every time I open like a social media account, I'm served ads for a new company. It's gotten to the point where it's like oversaturated.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Hanna. And that's kind of what I have experienced, as I've gone through the whole wave of different types of foods coming on the market. That's one of the areas that was underserved is the gently cooked, freshly cooked foods. It was usually something I'd have to rely on my clients to make their own food. And sometimes it's so labor intensive and can be more expensive than they anticipate. And so that was a missing segment of the food industry. But now it's kind of exciting to see that there's more and more of this coming out and giving owners opportunities to have better quality food choices for their babies.
And when you talk to me about social media, every time you open your app and you see a new pet, gently cooked or raw pet food maker, Unfortunately, I kind of think potentially that leads to a lot of space for misinformation. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of gently cooked or raw pet foods?
And I think this goes kind of broader than that. And it's misunderstood at both ends of the ideological spectrum, at the conventional side and at the holistic side. And there's kind of opposite viewpoints on this. From the conventional side, I hear from customers all the time, how can your food be complete and balanced? There's almost no supplements in here, and they're used to seeing foods with laundry lists of supplements, and they think that that's what balances the food. And then on the other side of the ideological spectrum, it's kind of become this purity test. And if there's any form of supplement, somehow that makes the food tainted, even though when you do this no supplementation thing, which I agree with in most cases, it really limits the formulation. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. And Steve Brown says it best. Steve Brown, sort of like the grandfather of food-based formulation. And he believes in targeted minimal supplementation. And personally, I believe that's the right approach. But it's this big misconception on both sides. So that's not even, I am starting to see it on social media, but I think that that's a broader issue.
So I find that really interesting because part of what I talk to my clients about is that all of those supplements and chemicals they see in those processed foods that they buy. So let's, talking about kibble. And it's because the over processing of the foods that are on the market actually destroy natural vitamins and minerals that are found in good, healthy foods. And so when those are destroyed, they have to add in all those or they have to add in all those supplements. So when you're dealing with a good nutritionally balanced food that's gently cooked or raw, you're not having to add those in because you're finding that in the food. And I do agree that there's a difference in quality of food. And so I have to say, Hanna, that your food to me shows that the way that it's sourced is so responsible. You're actually getting ingredients that are going to have maybe higher levels of those nutritious vitamins and minerals than in other foods that aren't sourced as responsibly. So one of the things I look at is like the pasture raised eggs that you put in your food are going to have those high omega-3s that you don't find in other types of eggs. So it's real simple. The ingredient source is so important for the nutritional, makeup of the food that you don't need to have those supplements if you're getting it from the naturally sourced food itself.
Oh, and I 100% agree with you on that about the processing and the low quality ingredients. And you'll even see gently cooked foods like this, where they'll have 4 or 5 ingredients that you recognize, and they're not having the things like the organ meats that really kind of fill out the formulas, and they'll still have that laundry list of supplements. And Sheila, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned the eggs and the omega-3s. We actually, at one point in our company, we'd always cared about using humane ingredients, but as a company grows, you have more purchasing power. And we'd always used certified humane, cage-free eggs. And when we had the opportunity to switch to fully pastured eggs, we do a lot of lab testing. We tested this. Our omega ratios completely changed. And originally, we had to supplement with choline in our chicken formulas. That totally went away. Our choline levels improved enough that we could remove that supplement because we really believe in food-based nutrition. The only thing that we supplement with currently is zinc and eggshell powder for calcium, but I don't really consider that a supplement in the same way because it's derived from nature.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that because to me, part of the challenge of over processed foods that are on the market that most people feed their pets are have a very disproportionate omega level. And so the omega levels that your food has, I find to be extremely exciting because a lot of the over processed foods are too high in omega-6s. And so your formulas have such a good ratio of omega-6s to 3s And it's something you don't find in the vast majority of the commercially prepared diets. And so I think those are the nutritional areas that most people aren't aware of, how important those omega levels are, how important all of the natural vitamins are. And I see that in the health of my patients when they're fed a much better quality food. They're going to get those natural vitamins and minerals that are going to give their body what it needs to function well. So I really applaud the ingredients that you have. I also am very happy that you have such a detailed list of the ingredients and just the whole profile of the ingredient nutritional profile listed, because as a veterinarian who's helping my clients choose diets, it's extremely challenging sometimes to be able to find what the food actually contains. And your diets are the first ones I've ever seen that actually give me all of that detailed information so that when I'm looking for a good food source for my patient, I can tell exactly how your diets are broken down. And more importantly, I have never in my life seen anyone actually show the protein percentage based on dry matter. And that's one of those areas that when I'm talking to my clients about, you want a good high quality protein diet. And when they're looking at a dry kibble versus a wet food or a more maybe gently cooked, it's difficult. You cannot compare those protein percentages because it's not apples to apples. And so I usually try to have them convert a wet food to give them an accurate protein percentage. But when I notice your labels show that, I'm like, hallelujah, you are the first people I have ever seen do that. So I have to say kudos to you, because that's one of the most important ingredients for my patients is a good high protein source diet. And it's extremely difficult to find unless, of course, you're feeding a commercially prepared raw diet. But finding a nice, healthy, gently cooked diet that does give me this information is really very exciting.
Thank you. And there's one piece of information that we share that I think in a lot of ways is even more important, which is the food on the nutritionals on a per calorie basis. So that way you can also calculate how much of a certain nutrient a dog is getting and what they're actually eating. So I think that's a really important piece of the equation. Now, something that is exciting about this, and I generally hate a lot about how AFCO, which is, I mean, that's a whole thing to explain, but they basically set standards that are adopted into law state by state for pet foods, but their labeling regulations, or I should say suggestions, are changing. So you're going to have to start listing that information, at least for the guaranteed analysis. So the protein, the fat, the carbohydrates, companies are going to have to start putting that in their labels. And I think that's supposed to be full implementation in 2026. So pretty soon consumers are going to have a lot more access to important information.
And I think that's valuable. And, I have my concerns with the AFCO requirements anyways, just because I'm not sure that they're really nutritionally based. They're more so, just numbers on a piece of paper, which is why all those chemical things are added in to bring those ingredients up to those requirements. So yeah, the AFCO guidelines are a little bit challenging. They haven't been updated in forever. And I, realize that they're starting to look at this, but I still don't believe that ensures good nutrition just because something follows AFCO guidelines.
Oh, I'm 100% with you there. And I think the guidelines, if you're really going to be looking at nutritional guidelines, FEDIAF, which is the European guidelines, they do a lot of research. They provide guidelines for more granular life stages, and they update based on the latest research. So even though these AFCO guidelines are generally fairly static, every now and then they'll change something. The FEDIAF, they're constantly changing them to align with what we are learning.
Good.
I'll include both links to both of these organizations in this podcast for our listeners to find more information. And this FEDIAF, if I'm saying it right, this might answer the question that's been bumping around in my head this whole time. So here I am sitting with an expert in pet nutrition, Hanna, an expert in veterinary care, Sheila. I am just the proud mother of 3 cats. I'm currently also trying to catch a stray dog. So, for someone like me, who my cats are healthy, also right now, we're not having, knock on wood, any health issues. How can I know what, I mean, you're talking per calorie nutrients on a per calorie basis. You're talking about the omegas that I need. I don't even know all of this necessarily for myself as a human. Where is there some cheat sheet? Like I can look up my cat's this age, it's this health, this is what I should have in a meal for my cat. Like how can us normal people figure this out?
So I don't know what the regulations are like where you are. I believe you're in the EU, right?
I'm in Ireland, yeah.
Yes. So that's right. That's EU, not UK.
Yes,
Yes, that's
correct.
what I thought.
Good.
You guys
I'm
did
in the
the right
South.
thing. The right thing on Brexit. So I know that the regulations here, you have to list on food. And again, I think we can agree that AFCO suggestions on what constitutes complete and balanced are potentially problematic. But I know in the US, it has to be listed whether or not it's a balanced profile. Now, for me personally, if you're willing as a consumer to make a bit of an investment and you are interested in doing home preparation, I love Animal Diet Formulator. They're a company that they have a database with so much information about different ingredients and even from a quality basis. So you can look at the ingredient as a grass-fed ingredient. You could look at the ingredient as just a conventional ingredient. You could look at the ingredient, what it would do cooked. You can look at the ingredient, what it would do raw. And it gives you all of the data that you need to do your own formulation using it's a little bit overwhelming at first, but it really gives you everything you need to create your own complete and balanced diets as in all life stages. So you can break it down to kitten to senior. So that's a really great tool people can use, at least on the non-commercial size.
And Sheila, like if a pet parent like me were to come into your veterinary office and, give a specific profile of the pet that I needed or the thing that I needed for my pet, would you say that you would sit down with me and try to, I guess I'm just struggling I can't even imagine a human doctor breaking down my nutritional needs, let alone a veterinarian. So is that like part of your consultation that you would be able to talk to pet parents about this? Is that something we should be expecting from our veterinarians now, or is that just you?
Oh, I think that's a great question because to me, I think it's something that you should be expecting from your veterinarian. Nutrition is such an important part of health. And as I always say, food is medicine. And so it's one of the first things that all of my technicians ask my patients coming in, what are you feeding? And I will have to say that, and in defense of most veterinarians, when we go through veterinary school, we are trained on the big name, commercial brand, overprocessed diets. And so that's our introduction to nutrition. And so we aren't really trained about good, healthy nutrition. So, I just kind of went on this path on my own and found and discovered that what I was taught is not providing the nutrition that I need for my patients. And so to me, it's kind of it depends. It depends on the health status of the patient. It depends on the owner's ability to afford what I would consider the best. And I always start with the best of being either a raw or a home cooked or gently cooked diet that's well formulated. So actually the food that Evermore has would be the top of my list because of the nutritional content of it. The challenge I see is that most of the commercially prepared foods are way too low in proteins and way too high in carbohydrates. So what I find is a lot of patients who come in obese, and most veterinarians are going to advise them, oh, here, put them on this diet food, put them on this food. Oh, you have kidney disease, put them on this food. And so I battled with that when I was in conventional practice. That's what I was taught. And I started to suddenly realize my patients weren't responding the way I expected them to. the foods that we were all trained would be the foods that would answer the problem. And so one of my classics is this very feisty Siamese cat who was extremely spicy, I would say, in my world. And her owners would bring her in, not in a carrier, would bring her in a laundry basket. So that made it even harder to deal with her. And she was obese, and they kept cutting back her dry food. And so she was eating a very high carb dry food, one of the big name brands, and we were cutting it back, and that cat would never lose weight. And then when I left that conventional practice and came to my current practice, this is when, the previous owner was touting good, fresh food and higher protein, lower carb. And so I started putting the cats who came in obese on wet foods, and a huge change in their ability to maintain a healthy weight. And I think that's the beauty of using gently cooked food, is you're going to get rid of those high carb foods that are affecting health. And so once again, we're seeing less diabetes in cats because we don't have the obesity issue. And so I really find food to be medicine. And so in my practice, that's the first thing I want to talk about is, what are you feeding your pet? Whether it's a dog or a cat, I want to know what the diet is, because I start with diet first. So if I'm seeing a second opinion, and let's say they're coming in for seizures, guess what? The first thing I want to know is, what are you feeding your dog? And I find, as part of my management for medical issues, diet is just as big of a tool to me as medicine is. And I think, unfortunately, most veterinarians, we're not taught much about nutrition. So it's not that easy for a veterinarian to want to tackle that topic, because it is so encompassing of a whole bunch of stuff that took me years to kind of do my own research. And I always tell people, I'm not a nutritionist, but I just know enough of what works best in my patients. And so this is what I recommend. And by far, I think I have the healthiest set of elderly patients that I've ever seen in any conventional practice.
Absolutely. It's good that you mentioned vet school, because I actually, this year for the first time, we went to SAVMA, which is sort of the student wing of the AVMA. And we went to they call it the SAVMA Symposium, and we had a booth. And we managed to lure so many people over by offering a gift certificate to the Scrubs company, Figs.
Good.
But part of that is we really had the chance to talk to them and to ask questions. And there was so much curiosity and interest in the fresh space. So that gave me a lot of hope. These students knew that their classes were being sponsored by big food companies. So
Yes.
they really did want outside perspectives. So that really gave me a lot of hope. And back to just fresh in general, I do want to mention that this is hitting the mainstream to the point where sort of the bigger companies are taking notice. Royal Canin just came out with a fresh food that is probably more rice than meat.
Yeah.
And then Blue Buffalo also announced that they're going to be putting out a fresh food. So I have really mixed feelings about it. One, they're putting out fresh, terrible foods.
Yes.
But two, they are introducing people to the idea of the category. So as it reaches a broader awareness, at least people can accept, okay, cooked food, and then maybe they'll find the better companies at least accepting this as a category. So, but again, the Royal Canin fresh food that they put out is 100% garbage.
Yes, and let's face it, that those markets are driven by what the public is buying. So I really believe it's a consumer driven move on their part. They're seeing this segment that's starting to take off, and so they wanted to kind of do a Me Too thing. And I totally agree with you, because whenever they join the Me Too, I find that their foods are not formulated in the healthy way, as you just mentioned. I mean, rice being probably one of the ingredients that they are going to put in all of their food. But they did the same thing when grain-free food became very popular. They all came out with a grain-free food version, even though they told everyone grain-free food was really bad. They still had one to somewhat appeal to some of those people in that market. So I struggle with those big pet food companies because I do think that they take advantage of a trend that they see and they're going to jump on the bandwagon. So I also rely more on the intelligence of the consumer who's doing the research. And so a lot of the people I see for second opinions have done their research, and I'm continually surprised at how many of them are coming in a little bit more educated about healthy food options. And so I do am happy that you are working with some of those students, because that's one of the things I also try to do. We do a lot of mentoring here, vet students who are coming through school, and I really focus a lot on nutrition with them because I don't think they get a good information when they're in school, just as when I was in school. But I do think the consumer is driving it. So I think any type of recognition of this as a better option to feed your pet is helpful, even though, as you said, I don't agree with the formulas they're coming up with, but at least there is a little bit more acceptance of a gently cooked diet, because most veterinarians would have said, oh God, don't ever feed your pet that. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, sorry to
I was
interrupt.
just, yeah, so I was just gonna say, so I think having some of those bigger companies kind of like jump in to the market a little bit should ease some of that resistance from the professional side of things.
Yeah, the consumers are extremely powerful. I think one of the biggest examples of this, not necessarily in pet food, is cage-free eggs.
Yeah.
Cage-free is still a long way from pastured, but as sort of the horrors of factory farming and confinement became part of the general public conversation, consumers push back, and now more than half of the eggs in the country, or roughly 50%, are cage-free. So consumers really do have power. Same thing with
Yeah.
hormones. Same thing with added hormones in milk production. That's another place where, as consumers became educated, they used their purchasing powers to really change the contours of the industry.
And I also think people are starting to make that move from, hey, this is what I'm looking at for myself. I should start to think about this for my pet. And so I'm seeing more and more of that. It's like a light bulb goes off in their head. Well, I don't want to eat that type of food. So why am I feeding my dog or cat this type of food? And so I think that's an important move towards, excuse me, towards better nutrition.
Yeah, and ironically, I think some of the marketing from these bigger companies is helping to drive that. For example, I think it was Blue Buffalo who is like, love them like family, feed them like family. And it's, well,
Yes.
I wouldn't feed my family this ultra processed like little nuggets. So in this weird backfiery way, I actually think some of that helped.
Yes, I agree. And it's funny you say that, because that's exactly the company that I mentioned to my clients when I say, here's an example of somebody who kind of forged the way into better nutrition, or at least people being open to thinking about nutritional foods differently than they had in the past. So they kind of forged the way. I think they, of course, went down the wrong path eventually, but they at least introduced to people that there is healthier ways of feeding your pet. So I think that started kind of way back when, the whole movement of moving towards healthier food.
And talking a little bit about like kind of the historical perspective of these brands and the ever-changing nature of that industry, I think anyone who learned something on the fly, as the two of you did, probably made some mistakes early on before you had all the information or just all the anecdotal evidence that I know both of you have experienced in your life. So going back in time, was there one mistake that you made with pet nutrition at the beginning that you're no longer making? And especially if it's something like someone like me might replicate in my own life as I'm feeding my pets, what would you say that mistake was? And we'll start with Hanna.
Not to be cocky, but our general philosophy back then hasn't really changed. I would say that the biggest mistakes that we made were from a regulatory standpoint. The initial formulas that we had included burdock, rose hips. I'm trying to think of the other ones. Garlic, which actually isn't regulatory problem. Oh God, what was the third one? Did I say nettle?
No.
Okay, and nettle. And all of these ingredients are amazing for so many reasons. But when we submitted our formula to the New York State Department of Agriculture, they were like, you can't use any of these. So because they're not, quote, defined by AFCO under their ingredient profiles. And garlic, small amounts, again, can be so good for animals, but that was more of a consumer perception issue. People were really, because, there's the garlic is poisonous, and the studies on that, I forget what the quantities were, but they used such an insane level of garlic that it really doesn't apply to the small amounts of garlic that you would give your dog for health reasons. But just, we were like, you know what? The people that believe in this can give dogs their own garlic at home. So we had to remove that ingredient. So again, all of these issues, I would say, were more regulatory than things that were nutritional mistakes.
And for me, it's probably that I drank the Kool-Aid from vet school. And, I really did push those big name brand kibble diets because that's all I knew. And I distinctly remember a study that was taught to us in vet school. So we're talking over 25 years ago, that they analyzed a rubber tire, and found out that nutritionally it could be considered pet food because of the way that it was analyzed. So the point being that they said, so you should never feed a food that doesn't go through rigorous, testing. And so you need to stick with these big name brands. Do never recommend a food that's not one of these big name brands who've done trials and studies and have actually done studies on dogs. And so that's always stuck in my head, because now I use that argument against them, because in reality, when they analyze those foods, what they analyze are the nitrogen content. So it doesn't necessarily have to be from animal protein, which is the ingredient that's the most utilized by pets when it comes to protein. So the way they analyze some of those foods can be, in my opinion, and I'm not sure if it's changed now, but the point being that it may be nutritional on a piece of paper, but can the body actually utilize those nutrients? And so I think back in my days of, okay, I really bought into that. But, when I started to see the changes in my patients who were eating these overprocessed kibble, I realized at some point, okay, the diet is really not helping me. And I think it's a roadblock to some of these issues. So that was probably my biggest mistake. But I tell you what, after I've went past that roadblock, I've never gone back again.
Yeah, it's actually disgusting what you are allowed to put in dog food. If you were to
Yes.
read that AFCO ingredient list, it would be shocking. I am going to push back on two things. One, I do think it is important for you to test your food and know
Yes,
exactly what's in your food.
I
That
agree.
that is, we wouldn't know what our omega ratios were if we didn't test them. You can just
I,
say, based on formulation, you could theoretically look at a spreadsheet that tells you, okay, these are the USDA nutritional information for the food, and you can say it's complete and balanced based on formulation, just using that information without further testing. And then you mentioned clinical trials on dogs. The AFCO trials that most companies do to say that a food is complete and balanced based on research. These trials involve 6 dogs, or 8 dogs, sorry, 8 dogs. 2 can drop out at any time. So we're looking at 6 dogs. They only last 6 months, and they look at weight, maintaining weight, and they look at blood serum levels of a very limited number of markers. When it can take much longer than that. It can take years for signs of nutritional deficiencies to show up. So these studies are in no way adequate to sort of validate the value of a food, the nutritional adequacy of a food.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, and I agree 100%. And that was the message they were giving us at that point. And yeah, no, I totally agree that food needs to be tested. And what they were saying is that if they didn't do clinical trials on their formula in their, for their particular food, then it wasn't a valid food to feed. regardless of if it met AFCO standards or not. So
Yeah.
so those are just some of the challenges I think that a lot of the big name companies want veterinarians to believe are what they consider the standards for a good food. So anything that's outside of a big corporation is considered less than food, which I find to be completely the opposite of the truth.
Yeah, and it's those big corporations that sponsored the organization
Oh,
that
yeah.
WASAVA, right? And we started getting all of these WASAVA questions after the DCM controversy, which we
Oh,
can get
God.
into.
Don't get me
Don't get me
started on
started.
that.
Yeah, it's still, I mean, it's the zombie that will never die for us.
Exactly.
But WASAVA is this organization that created these guidelines for what you should look for in a food company. And all of these guidelines, they're not tailored to actually determine the quality of the food. They really kind of cheat. So it is about the size of the company.
Yeah.
And it's just the bigger companies playing dirty.
Yeah, and I have to say, in all honesty, the reason that this is happening is because they're feeling threatened by the good quality foods that are coming out into the marketplace. And I think it's impacting their revenue. And I think more and more people are feeding better quality food. And so I think they find every way they can to combat it by trying to use scare tactics, which is the whole grain-free causes DCM in dogs debacle, which there had been zero research to support that theory that they floated. And so I could go on and on about that. And I fight that one still every day. And so even though it's been debunked, that whole idea that they put out there in the universe, no one has stood up to say, oh, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. This doesn't really cause DCM. So we still have to fight those battles. But I do think that is an indication of the impact that better quality nutritional diets out there are having on these big corporations.
I do want to just let one additional fact. So the FDA came out, and at one point and DCM is dilated cardiomyopathy. It's a heart
Myopathy.
condition.
Yeah.
A myopathy.
Sorry.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
say stuff wrong all the time. Like I always say glyphosate and glyphosate. I always transpose things. But anyway, it was based on this correlation was based on a very poorly designed study. But when it got out there, it became this whole news story. Grain-free food will kill your dogs. Boutique foods will kill your dog. And the FDA published a list of companies that were associated, at least reported to be fed to dogs that developed this condition. And they named brands. And none of these brands were small brands. To take it back, actually,
Yeah.
Blue Buffalo, who we mentioned, was on that list. The FDA, in a rare move, then about a year later, retracted their warning. But it's so easy to get misinformation out there. And once it's out there, you cannot put that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah,
So
just for a little bit more background. So this was not really a study, it was a retrospective, which meant cardiologists across the country started to realize they were seeing more cases of dilated cardiomyopathy in dog breeds that weren't typical. And so they're like, I wonder why this is happening. And so they started to notice a lot of those patients were eating grain-free foods. And so they came out with a statement that said, oh, look, we say grain-free foods are causing dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs. And so it became this huge debacle. And as you said, the FDA started to track reports of that. And the FDA kept asking them, where is the scientific research that proves that this is a correlation? So I told people is nutritionally, there is no reason that grains would prevent heart disease, zero reason nutritionally. And so there was a lot of side talk about taurine levels, but you don't get taurine from grains. So not having grains is not going to decrease taurine. Taurine is an amino acid that's going to be found in proteins, so animal-based proteins. And that was kind of debunked that it wasn't taurine. And then they did name boutique brands. But as you said, I looked at the entire list and I did my own tally sheets. And the vast majority of the dogs were eating some of the bigger name brands. And so it really wasn't boutique brands, but more importantly, it has nothing to do with it being a grain-free food. And so there was a lot of research done after that because they were trying to say it was peas and all the pulse ingredients, maybe it was white potato and peas. And there was a research study done down in the islands, somewhere in the Caribbean, and they fed these dogs only a pea-based diet, and none of those dogs developed heart disease. So, there's all these studies that have gone on since then. But the one that I find most fascinating is that a study was done here out of MU in Columbia, Missouri, and they found that they charted the sales of grain-free foods over the last 10 or so years. From the time that the grain-free foods kind of hit the market, it quadrupled in volume. So 5 times until about 2019, I think. And then they also put over that graph the cases of dilated cardiomyopathy that were diagnosed in dogs during that time. So by this, theory, you would expect those cases to quadruple. The cases remained stable. They never increased. There were still the same number of cases that were reported every year in that time, that we had quadrupled or 5 times the volume of grain-free foods to 0 increases in percentage of dogs that were diagnosed with DCM. So I tell people, it's like, there is no correlation. So it'd be no different than if they said, hey, I've seen more dogs with red collars come in that are diagnosed with heart disease. So I think red collars are causing heart disease. So to me, there was just no correlation. They just made this assumption, which, as a side note, these cardiologists are supported by the big name researchers that they get paid by, provided by the big name companies who provide the foods. And so it really was this whole debacle. And as you said, the FDA came out and said, well, you guys haven't shown us any research that supports this, so we're going to stop collecting any data on it. So they just said, hey, we don't see any reason for this. And so I told people, because I have this huge population of patients who are eating healthy, mostly grain-free diets in my clinic. I have thousands and thousands of patients. And I had 5 dogs who were diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy. We have a very close relationship with the local cardiologist, so we do refer a lot of our patients whenever we suspect heart disease. And those 5 dogs were predisposed breeds. So you expect to have those breeds develop that disease. So I call this the whole grain-free cardiomyopathy debacle, because it was really misinformation that was put out there, and there was no scientific backing to it. And there has been 0 research that has proved there's any correlation between a diet that doesn't have grains and heart disease. So it's still something that I battle every day. There's still cardiologists out there who still tell their patients who are recently diagnosed, don't feed grain-free food. And I tell my patients, that's malarkey. I want good nutrition. And we're going to feed good quality food, and we're going to support the body to the best that it can.
Yeah, it is also something we battle every day. And the original sort of study that snowballed it, and again, yeah, it was retrospective, was done at Tufts, and it was funded entirely by Purina.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's hard to trust those studies.
Yeah.
And it's like what is it, the fox in the hen house? So
Yeah.
it's and again, it bites us to this day. We actually just had someone this morning, how do I add grain to your lamb formula?
Don't do it.
We get that all the time. And it's funny, in our original formulas, we had a small amount of oats and barley. They're less than 5% of the formula. And they do add, we don't put an ingredient in unless it adds something to the formula. But, people were like, grain free, we need our grain free formula. And then one day it was, no, we need grains, we need grains, we need grains. So, and like anything with nutrition, it's not a fixed science. Things do change. Again, I think this grain-free thing, I think you used the word malarkey, that is really not based on good science, but things are constantly evolving. We're constantly learning new things. So I think that that's also important to keep in mind as these new trends, new things that people are seeing. as we're just seeing new things in the market, especially with higher quality foods that are paying attention.
Yes, I agree.
So, one of the things I wanted to make sure that I asked you before the end of this podcast, which we're getting quite near to, is can you tell me a story in both of your lives or practices about how changing a pet's diet had a profound impact on their health? Because I mean, it's one thing to just feed my cat breakfast and dinner every day and not really think about it. It's completely another thing to have my cat, having a health crisis and then be able to tweak their nutrition and extend their life, or at least extend their comfort. Nutrition is that powerful, but I think we just take food for granted as humans and as pet parents. So, Hanna, starting with you, do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, I actually have one that's happy, then happy, sad at the same time. I'm going to start with my own dog, Sharkita, who shortened to Shark. She's unfortunately no longer with us. But when she came to me, she had just been treated for Demodex. She was a mess. Like there were these open sores all over her body. Her fur was so dry. And I was actually really allergic to her, but committed to keeping her because she was so cool. As we put her on Evermore, because she'd been eating kibble before, the transformation was magical. Those sores went away. She stopped biting on her paws. Her fur, got shiny and healthy. And as an interesting side effect of this, I also became less allergic to her. And I find that when I encounter kibble-fed dogs and they're throwing a lot of dander and they've got that greasy coat, I'm more allergic to them. I'm slightly allergic to dogs. And dogs with healthy coats, raw or cooked fed dogs that are eating a good diet, especially with those proper omega ratios, they're not throwing dander in quite the same way. Their skin is healthy. And my allergies are pretty much non existent. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep going with the shark story.
Yeah.
So, Shark was a completely healthy dog. She had some weird stuff, but we were running till she was 10 years old. And one day she collapsed on me. She was actually 10. And I'd been doing the mental math in my head that she would live to 17, like my partner's German Shepherd mix. And it was awful. Like she collapsed on me. We took her to the vet. She passed away that day. It turned
Oh,
out she had hemangiosarcoma, which is a cancer that is just like fatal. Something like 8% of dogs diagnosed it live beyond a year. And it was it was like this huge crisis, like this personal crisis. I'm selling a product that's supposed to be supporting health, and my own dog that was healthy yesterday dropped dead on me. So I was really thinking about the limitations of food. Then, like a couple weeks later, we got an email from one of our customers, Mimi, and she told me about her dog, Kimmy, who had been diagnosed with hemangiosarcoma. And she did some interventions, but one of the things she did was switch to our food. And she wanted to say, "Hey, my dog is doing really well on your food despite having this condition." She checked in every 2 months to let us know that there'd been no tumor spread, and her vets were so shocked that she was doing so well. And this went on like for the dog lived 18 months past her diagnosis and was healthy and happy in other regards from the cancer until the end. Like she was active, she was happy. So I'm gonna cry here. Like
You can't.
I'm really
This will
gonna
be the
cry.
second. We cry in every one of your podcasts, Hanna. Your
Yeah,
other
because
podcast.
because it kind of really brought my faith back. Like food is medicine, but it can
mm.
only go so far. But to know that we really were integral, and this woman really believed we were integral to extending this dog's health span and maintaining her quality of life, that kind of like brought my faith back into our fundamental mission. So
Yeah.
that's my happy, sad story.
Aw.
So you're pretty sure then that because you had been feeding Shark that nutritional food as long as you did, Shark probably had this cancer for a really long time and you just didn't know.
I have no idea how. I mean, she could have had it for 3 months. She could have had it for a year. There's literally no way of knowing.
Wow.
She was the day before she passed away, or actually 2 days, we ran our fastest 4 miles ever.
Oh my goodness.
She
Aw.
like went out with a bang.
Wow,
So
that's amazing. Well, rest in peace, Shark. And also,
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet, just knowing as much as I do about Evermore, which is not very much, that pet food really did help prolong her life. And she's lucky to have had a running buddy like you.
oh, she had a great life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when your guardian owns a pet food company,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lucky
things
girl.
could be
Lucky girl.
worse. Things
yeah.
could be worse. Well, what about you, Dr. Sheila? Any happy, sad stories?
Oh, I have so many happy stories because, as I said earlier, and as Hannah just said, food is medicine. And so it's usually the first thing I do. And so I see lots of patients who come in with horrible skin issues, and then we change their diet. We put them on fresh food, and we see such good improvement. But one patient that I can think of particularly was a little min pin, and this was early on in my food journey. And this little min pin came in, was very poorly regulated, was diabetic, and constantly her values are going up and down, and they would have to increase insulin, decrease insulin. And so it was a challenge. So when they came in and I said, we need to change off of kibble. And so we did, we changed that dog's diet, and we were able to regulate the diabetes for the first time in her entire life. And so it's being able to once again give the body what it needs to balance itself out. And so there is no replacement for good nutrition in my book, and I see lots of stories like you just said, Hanna. And so yeah, I'm just a firm believer that good nutrition does so much for the body, and we can really help it to heal.
Wow. Okay. That story is a very happy story, and I'm glad you shared it. I feel like we have to be careful because that opens a whole new can of worms about what
Yes.
we can learn about our pets' nutrition for us as humans as well, because us humans have diabetes as well. And Hannah and I did talk a little bit about this in her first podcast about her reflections on her own nutrition after starting to work for Evermore and how dramatically her nutrition changed. I know, Dr. Sheila, you mentioned that a little bit too, about how your nutrition changed after learning about pet nutrition. But suffice to say, I'm grateful to you for sharing that story for more than the reason initially asked. And let's all put a pin in that idea for our own nutritional purposes. So I will close this podcast now. I want to leave our listeners with a final idea. The pet parents out there who are listening to this, what is one, or we'll say two, because one is a bit restrictive, what are one or two bits of advice that you would like to give our listeners about feeding their pets? Hanna?
I think the number one piece of advice is that ingredients matter. They matter way more than that long supplement list. So when you are assessing a pet food, look at the ingredients. Meat should be first. And even if it's first, if the second ingredient is rice and the third ingredient is corn, there's probably more of those ingredients than there is of meat. So it does take a certain level of savvy to read a label. And I think that's a topic for a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
And Sheila?
So my advice would be don't feed kibble. So, in my opinion, kibble is probably the least nutritious food you could feed your pet. So, I would say don't feed kibble. I mean, I recommend only gently cooked or fresh or raw as the best nutrition possible. So, yeah. And reading labels is very challenging. Manufacturers have gotten really good at piecing out portions. So they take an ingredient that may be the largest ingredient and they'll piece it into different names. So there was one that said the first ingredient was, I believe, fish, and it was good. Then there was Nortaki potatoes, and then there was another kind of potatoes, and there was another kind of potatoes. So they made them different types of potatoes. But if you put them all together, by far the main ingredient was potatoes. And so it's challenging to read labels. So I just say if you avoid kibble, then you can probably save yourself a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I was recently at one of our major pet food stores here, and there's actually like two major ones, and this one carries more wet food for cats, which is the reason why I go there. Even then,
Awesome.
there's two aisles of dry cat food, kibble, and one aisle of wet cat food. And so I was in the checkout and I was like stacking up my cans, and the woman in the checkout line was like, and would you like to add these cat treats? You know, trying to upsell me. Good on her. I appreciate an upsell. Would you like to add these cat treats on? And I looked at the cat treats and they're, you know, some crappy kibble,
Yeah.
carbohydrate full treats. And I said, no, I can't give my cats that. One of my cats will have, his ear will become inflamed if he eats kibble or any dry cat food. And she's like, what, really? I was like, yeah, you shouldn't be feeding your cats dry cat food. I'm saying this to the woman who
Good
works there.
job.
She's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Everyone here feeds their cats dry cat food. And I was like, I just want to like stand
Yeah, I
up
mean-
at a moment. And I actually referenced both of our podcasts. I was like, oh, well, I work for the Veterinary Cannabis Society, and I have actually recently done 2 podcasts on this topic. You can look for them. These are the titles. They're on YouTube.
Yeah,
But-
it's the leading cause of like kidney failure, which is like the leading cause of death in cats. So
And
it
doesn't everybody knows this?
Yeah.
Like, why is this unknown?
It's because the veterinary profession still believes that kibble is the best food. And so that's my number one thing is I do a lot of cat behavior and a lot of cat consultations. And my number one thing is a cat by far should never eat kibble. They need to have wet food. So kudos to you. And you should have told her your cat's treats are mice and you don't need those dry kibble things.
That's right. That's right. And I will actually give a little credit here too, even before I met the two of you. There is that cat influencer, the cat daddy, Jackson Galaxy. And he was the first one. I started watching his videos, you know, several years back, and he was the first person that ever said, don't feed your cats kibble in my realm. So it makes me happy to know that even someone as popular as him is at least turned on to this.
I used to love his show where he
Oh.
would like work with these hellion cats and like get
My
them.
cat from hell. Yeah.
Yeah, right. My
Yeah.
cat from hell.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have a cat from hell, and I still learned from Jackson Galaxy, so it's positive on both ways. So Hanna and Dr. Sheila, I'll go ahead and put the links in below for your different organizations, the Wellness Center, Evermore Pet Food. I know, Hanna, that you are on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn as Evermore Pet Food. Sheila, are you just on your website, or do you want anyone else to follow you on social media?
Yeah, I'm just on the website.
Beautiful. That's a real veterinarian.
That's right.
Can I share my Substack too? Because we just started a Substack.
Oh, amazing.
I say
Yes.
things people disagree with sometimes, but it's at Evermore Pet Food is my Substack as well.
Awesome. We would love to directly support you in that way. So thank you all so much for listening to this. If you have any comments or questions below, be sure to post them, and maybe we'll hear back from Hanna and Sheila on the topic.
Thanks so much, guys. Good to see you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks Emily for doing this, and Sheila, it was lovely
Yes.
meeting you.
Nice to meet you, Hanna. We'll talk soon.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to the entirety of this podcast. We're grateful for your time. The Veterinary Cannabis Society is a donation-based organization, so please consider giving today. You can donate via our website, www.veterinarycannabiссociety.org. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Evermore Pet Food, for supporting this episode. You can find their contact information in the description below. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you're notified when our next podcast launches.